brews, and banter.
Hi, Frank.
Hey, man. How are you?
Doing great. I'm excited for today's guest. I'm going to let Devin introduce himself, give us a little background, and we'll start from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Devin.
Yep. Thank you for having me on. I know you said we'll start with the military background, so I actually just got done doing 10 years. So I just got out about 4 weeks ago now. So, yep.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
Congratulations, and thank you for your service.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What branch of military did you serve in?
So I was in the Army.
Army.
Wait, so you grew that beard in less than 4 weeks?
So I had about 60 days off. So I had about So I had 2 months off from my leave that accumulated over 10 years. So I guess this is progress of over 4 months. Yeah.
Okay, good. I was like, boy, that's impressive.
Have you been to overseas tours?
Yeah. So I've been to Korea, I've been to Kuwait, and then I've also been to Germany.
Oh, Germany's got to be. That's our bucket list for the beer fest.
That's why we're drinking beer. Cheers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Devin, give us a little background of what it was like serving in the Army, what your job was, and what inspired you to write your book, and give us an introduction into your book.
Yeah, I would say military was definitely a rough experience for me for probably the first 5 years. I had a lot of things going on in the background. So, I guess before I get to my military career, and what kind of inspired the book was kind of when I look back on my background, I kind of looked at my story, and towards the end of writing the book, I kind of started to question, like, what are the odds of me coming out of this situation? And it ended up being like around 10 to 20% when I threw it into the computer of me turning my life around. And so what initially got me into the military was that I wasn't doing good in school. Like the previous year, when I was a junior, I ended up failing out of one of my courses. I believe it was honors geometry. And then my dad was kind of having issues with my attitude. He's like, I'm not paying for this. You're going to figure this out yourself. You're going to go get a job, everything like that. And he was pretty much like that on me for the entire summer until I found something. I started filling out resumes, but I would show him the pictures because I wasn't living with them. And then I would throw the resumes away because I was pretty rebellious at the time. And then from there, he got tired of my attitude. So he's like, have you ever considered joining the military? I'm like, sure. It gets him off my back. And then he ended up calling my bluff. He's like, okay, cool. He got his keys. Like, let's go see the recruiters right now. So I ended up going down there. Ended up liking what they said. And it was kind of a win-win situation because they're like, hey, we could pay for school. Because I didn't really have any plans. I was junior at this time. I didn't have any plans to go into college because, again, I was smart, but I kind of like slept in all my classes. At this point in life, I didn't really care for life. So I was kind of like just going in the motions. And so what the Army did, it ended up giving me like something to strive for. And it kind of gave me like a reason also to get out of my hometown. And to give like a brief background of like why I wasn't really caring for life at that time was that, I came from poverty. I also come from a city called like Rockford, Illinois. So it's like rated 5 out of 100 on the crime index, meaning like 95% of the United States is safer than Rockford, Illinois. I also grew up in poverty. So I went to like 7 different schools before I joined the military. I lived in 16 different places for the first 18 years of my life. So I also lived with like my mother and my father, 2 different aunts. I've lived with like grandparents. I lived with like friends of family and everything like that. I've lived in from like houses, apartment, trailers, farm, all the way down to like a motel. And so I had a very unstable upbringing. And then on top of that, my name is Devin Fish. So Fish was not a very good name to have like growing up. And then on top of that, I was the quiet kid. And then I was also like 120 pounds, like soaking wet. I'm still pretty skinny for my age and everything like that. So all those kind of like factors kind of like grew together to where it's like I pretty much became mute when I was pretty early on in life because of moving back and forth. I couldn't have like stable friends or anything like that. And so that kind of all accumulated and then joining the military, I kind of had to get out of all those bad habits. And I kind of took some of them with me. And so those are kind of like some of the beginning factors. And then there's also like hardships to where when I was getting ready to join the military about a month away from basic training, I ended up coming home from school one day. It was a Friday evening. And then to summarize the story up, I ended up coming back home to a apartment complex full of police vehicles surrounding the apartment that I was in. And then went up to the apartment. They're like, hey, we're not going to allow you to go in this apartment. We don't want you seeing what's going on right now. We found out that my dad resisted arrest. So essentially what happened was that he had Fireball whiskey and cocaine in his system. And so that he pretty much exploded with a bunch of adrenaline in him. And then he pretty much completely destroyed that apartment complex. So he had to be tased, sedated, taken into the hospital. And that was kind of like my first experience right before I go to basic training. You know, I go to basic training for about a year. So I ended up going to basic training 3 different times. So this is like right after I'm going through the stuff with my father. So I went to basic training, failed out, wasn't good at rifle marksmanship, went to the second basic training, passed that one, went to AIT. I was going to be a 68 Charlie, which is a nurse. I ended up failing out of that school about 5 weeks in because there was a 70% dropout rate. Didn't know that when I signed the contract. And then I also had a 6-year contract. So the Army had me for like another 5 years after that, just needs of the Army because I failed out of the course. So I failed out of that, and then I became a cavalry scout, which is 19 Delta, and it's a combat NWS, and their training is linked with their basic training. So I then had to go back to basic training for the 3rd time. And then after that, I passed basic training again. I went to Fort Hood, Texas. I was 19 at the time, and then I got a phone call from my mother. Nothing extreme. It was, she just wanted to see how I was doing, and it was about 2 weeks from my birthday. You know, said I love you, said our goodbyes, and then I got a Red Cross message the next day, and they're like, hey, you need to come back to Illinois, your mother's not doing so well. So what ended up happening with her is that she had a bad reaction to some of the medication she was on at the time, and it ended up frying her brain from the inside out. So at 19, I just discovered that it was going to be the last time I talked to my mother, went to the hospital, and then I'm the eldest son, and the first decision I have to make is like, do you want to keep her on life support or do you want to let her go? So that decision was pretty much solely on me. I ended up deciding to let her go. But as I was making that decision with my aunt in the room, the nurse comes in. They're like, hey, there's nothing we can do. So heading to my first unit after all these events are happening in my life, I had to sit there and watch my mother die. And then, you know, fast forward to 2019, I ended up, at this point, I'm already hating life. You know, looking back on everything, I'm like, maybe it wasn't my parents, maybe it wasn't the Army, maybe it wasn't the schools, maybe it wasn't, you know, the city, and then all that accumulated into self-hatred. And so at this point, I ended up getting invested into the dating realm and the dating scene. I started downloading all the apps, doesn't go well. And from there, I end up, so throughout that entire year, I ended up getting blackmailed about 7 different times, and I was getting blackmailed for about a year straight, off and on from different people, because I ended up getting desperate on I was looking for something to love, but I couldn't really find it myself, so I looked for it in other people, but I didn't find any people, and so when I didn't find any people, I just kept getting worse and worse and worse, to where it's like, I knew these people were like scamming me, I knew they were like catfish and everything like that, but I got to the point where I didn't care, and I would just give them whatever they wanted. If they wanted money, I'd give them money. If they wanted photos, I'd give them photos. And what this ended up doing is eventually I got myself caught up into the worst scam you can get yourself into, which is the age scam, right? You start a conversation, they swap the ages, and then next day they call, they're like, hey, this person's in the hospital. We know you're in the military, so you can either help pay their hospital bills, or we're going to report you to police, we're going to report you to the military, we're going to come arrest you and everything like this. And then it was pretty much that conversation that kind of was the beginning of the book, and where the concept of the book comes from, which is answering the hard questions. And the first question I had to ask myself was like, do I want to die? And I kind of had to make that decision before I submitted myself to the hospital. And once I started making that decision, I started to turn my life around. It took about 2 or 3 years. And then once I turned my life around, that was kind of when it was placed in my head of like, maybe I have a story to tell. I didn't write anything on paper just yet. It took another 2 or 3 years for me to actually sit down and write the story. But that was overall why I ended up writing the story, because I looked at all these events and everything I had overcome. I looked at that 10 to 20%. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe someone else is going through this situation. I can pass whatever I learned on to the next person.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's a lot.
That's quite a bit you went through.
And you're still here. So, you know, thank you for that.
Congratulations on battling that,
and probably still battling, right?
Yeah. Not as bad as it used to be. When I look back on my life now, I used to see it as I'm like, I hate my life. I hate everything that's going on. Now I kind of look at it it's like, okay, all these things happen. Now I can help someone else. So now I look at them as more as positive experiences rather than, suffering when I was actually going through it. So I don't, occasionally I think about, if I do think about it, it's more of like, how can I use this to help someone else rather than looking at it as like, oh, suicidal, or looking at the self-hatred, looking at it from different angles. So it's completely different of how I look at it now.
Sure.
It's like you endured that sacrifice to then help others.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't selfish. You came out of it and you said, my suffering and what I went through could be a help to someone who's dealing with that. So that's very brave.
Yeah, that's again, I'm still processing like all that loss. Just, I mean, before 19, before you went to the basic training, but I can't imagine what that is like as a teenager. You're a teenager, right? So,
yeah,
the decisions you had to make, that's pretty tough. And I haven't had a chance to start your book yet, but I will. I'm just kind of curious now, talking to you, how much of that is highlighted in the book?
Can you repeat that one more time?
How much of what your early time before you went, before you checked yourself in the hospital and started to work on yourself, how much of that is in the book?
So, like, how long did it take me to kind of change and get away from all the self-hatred and stuff like that?
Like, how much of your life experience before that did you put in the book?
Like, how detailed are you in the book about what you went through?
Oh, how detailed am I? Okay, sorry about that. I think either it's my headphones or something to where it's like the sound keeps going in and out for me right now. But how detailed I get in the book, I get pretty detailed, especially when it comes to, I talked about, I briefly went through and said I got blackmailed several times. In the actual book, I talk about every single circumstance of when I got blackmailed, how it went down. And I get very explicit and very graphic with the details to where a lot of people, when they read the book, they're like, it's brutally honest and it will make you uncomfortable at times. And so I will talk about, some of the thoughts that were going through my head. I will talk about what I was going through with my body, what I was experiencing, what I did. So I try to be as detailed as possible. And the reason I say it in the book and why I wanted to be so detailed and why I wanted it to be explicit was I wanted to make the story real for the person. So I had to kind of essentially, now that I'm in a better state of mind, I had to kind of bring myself back to that point. I'm like, okay, what did I feel back then? And then I had to turn that into a book for the reader. And then and then I also order it differently to where it's like, okay, how can I use it to where they're reading this? And then how can I build the reader up from there and progress through the book?
So you're literally an open book. Like the whole thing is you're not holding back.
No. I absolutely do not hold back in the book at all. There were sections that I eventually cut because they were a little too harsh. Because there is a fine balance point between, okay, I'm going to give you the explicit details so that you can see where this is going to lead if you're in that same trail, and this is what you're going to go through if you keep going through it. But I also had to not be as harsh because if they're in the same situation I am and they're thinking about life and death, I have to ease kind of into that to where it's if I say, hey, do you want to die? Well, maybe someone's actually going to consider taking your life just from that one statement. And then so this is the reason why I didn't take my life. And then how the book is actually structured is that you have the memoir sections where I'm very explicit and I tell people about my life. And then there's kind of the subsections to where I'm almost talking to the audience member. And then at the end of those sections, I also have a question for the reader so that they can kind of follow along. So it kind of eases the reader into the journey as they're going on it with me.
That was very difficult stuff to put in a book. Mm-hmm. What was it like for you to, as you're writing this and you seeing it, you're putting this on paper
and reliving it, right?
what it was like emotionally, and to kind of re-experience that, to bring that back out.
So there were definitely difficult parts of the book when I had to rewrite it. Um, I had to like drag my mind back in that hell. I'm like, okay, well, how can I use this to help them, and what is going too far? Because originally I didn't have the memoir sections in the book. That was actually a last minute edit. So before I locked the manuscript in, I gave it to the chief editor. He reviews it, and then he's like, "Hey, these are the good things about it. These are the bad things about it." He's like, "You wrote a self help book, but you didn't include your story. You didn't give them a reason to want to get help from you or to like take your advice." And so I ended up adding those after the book was written. And so what I was kind of doing on my own was I would, anytime I kind of like had a thought, I would write it down. And that was part of the book that was called like Answering the Hard Questions, to where I was making these subsections. And then I added the story to the end. And then once I kind of accumulated like 100 ideas or so, I started reorganizing them. And I'm like, okay, do I want this in chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? And then go from there. And then I suppose some of the difficult parts about the memoir was very easy to write because I had so much to actually write down and based on all these experiences. The hard part was, I guess, how much I wanted to tell the reader, and I decided to go all the way. Like when I go into describing the blackmail, that's why I give them like each circumstance. I'm like, okay. And that took me probably about a year to get down on paper because I went back and forth about like, do I want to tell these people these amount of details and give, fuel to the fire if like someone wants to come after me, especially about like the dating scam. And then I also talked about like one of them before that. And so I'm like, how much fuel to the fire do I want to give them? And I'm like, I think I need to give it all just in case someone else is going in the exact same situation, and give them a reason and give them like their hope back to them.
Mm-hmm. Right, because that's what they would face. That would be the similar experience that they would come across in order to relate to the information in the book, and maybe that being helpful because how related that is. So that, I mean, that I can't imagine it because I've never been in that situation. But I would at least imagine that someone who's going through a hard time and comes across this book and it helps them out. What you did could help, even if it helped one person. I always say that if I could do something that helps at least one person, I'm happy with it. Yeah,
I wish you'd do something just to help me at all.
I don't care about you, so.
See? No, that's how it works, Sherry. But yeah, so it's so you've got the book. It's detailed, right? It's how long has it been out? How when was this published?
Let's see. I published it on March 31st. The book itself has been doing really well. The length of the book, I want to say it's around like 260 pages. It's hard to say because there's a portion to where I left a journal section for the reader so that they could actually write down their answers as they're reading the book. And so there's like 70 pages just for them to where they can do that. I would say it's around like 267 pages, though, of going through like all those different stories, all those different circumstances. But yeah.
All right. So how we're here together doing this. How else are you sort of getting the word out about your book for people to obviously get to know your story and obtain the material?
There have been a couple like other projects I've been doing. One of them is doing this like podcasting. So this is probably, I think, around 15 of the podcasts I've done. So I've been working with like a PR team. So we've also done I've done podcasts with like people in Florida. I did one with people in the UK. There's one in Australia. There's some that have been with other like law enforcement or like military. There's been some people where they're doctors. And so they kind of want to see like the experience and that. So that's one way I've been spreading it. I've been doing, I just got into like YouTube myself like a couple of weeks ago. So that's where so they can kind of see what I'm doing now post like book, and where I also like recorded like my story to where because I gave like a very fast version, but like when I actually sit down and say it, it takes like an hour, almost like 2 hours to actually sit down and tell everything. And that's not if I go into like details and stuff like that. And then I don't do a whole lot of social media right now, just because it's been like mixed. Like sometimes like there'll be some good feedback. Sometimes there's like quote unquote like book influencers to where they kind of like swarm your account with like bots, and I had to shut like a couple accounts down for that.
Yeah.
Luckily, I was already experienced with the scamming, so I kind of recognized it. I'm like, okay, I got to get away from this. And one of them like added like 100 like bot accounts to my thing. I'm like, okay, I'm shutting this down. And then so now it's just been kind of like that YouTube and then Facebook and then the podcasting right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you had anyone reach out to you and said like, Devin, thank you for writing this book. I read it. It helped me out.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had feedbacks like that? Can you share any of the stories?
Yeah. So when I about a month before I made the book itself, I had about 50 copies. That's what the publishing company did for me. They gave me 50 copies to hand out for samples and stuff like that. But I was also, before I finished the book, I was also doing this for suicidal awareness training for the military. So and that was actually what really inspired me to write the book was that, and I want to say this was 2024, late 2024, early 2025, I put this, it wasn't a book yet and I hadn't written anything down, but I put it in a PowerPoint to where I kind of gave those initial 3 stories and then kind of ways I got myself out of it. I ended up submitting that for training to do with my coworkers, my fellow career counselors. That's what I later transitioned to. It ended up getting turned around because it wasn't what they're looking for at the time. So I'm like, okay, I want to tell this story. So now I'm going to go write a book. So I ended up making the book. And then right when I was getting ready to lock in the manuscript and publish the book, I re-looked at the PowerPoint. I redid the PowerPoint. I brought it to my sergeant major at the time because he wanted me to do some NCO PD training to train the NCOs. And so originally I was like, okay, maybe I'll just do some like easy training or something like that. But I'm like, I ended up redoing the original PowerPoint, sent it to him. I'm like, can I do this? And he's like, sure, I'll let you do it. And then that training ended up getting canceled because it was only for like 20 or 30 people. And he's like, I'm going to have you do suicide awareness training, not for the NCOs. I want you to do it for the entire battalion now. So the first time I got to present it was actually in front of about 200 or 300 people. And that was before the book came out itself. And the initial thing I kind of heard when I got done with doing that speaking was that they're like, it was very courageous because they're like, not many people would actually want to sit down and tell that kind of story. And then the other part they're like, hey, thank you for telling the story because I've also gone through similar circumstances. And so kind of what that kind of showed me, and I ended up adding it to the book before we locked it in, was that, you know, it's a story people want to hear. It's just no one wants to be the first one to actually sit down and tell the story itself.
Sure. Yeah, that happens a lot, I think.
It takes courage to do that too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who wants to talk about you often see people talk about the success in their lives. They don't really share the failures and struggles, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So that takes courage to do it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, so is there more coming from you? So you've got this book. I mean, I know it's early, but is there something else you plan to do? Another book or some other, I mean, even audiobook or some other part 2, phase 2, sequel?
Yeah. So when I did the publication, they asked if I wanted to do the audiobook. I'm like, not right away. Let me build up an audience for that before we spend like an extra $6,000-7,000 because that's like how much it takes to like actually record it, get it distributed, and everything like that. So I wanted to make sure there's like a market before I did that. But what I'm doing now, I still write. So I'm about 100 pages into like another book right now, to where it's a continuation of kind of where I left off and where I left the last book. And one of the core themes that I had in the book was that I wasn't a Christian at the time when I wrote this book, but I ended up contemplating the thought of like God specifically and Christianity. And at the end of the book, I ended up opening the Bible again and I refound my faith. And so that's kind of what this next book is going to be. And I have the title, which is Answering the Call, a continuation of faith and questioning, to where it literally continues like right after I wrote this actual book.
Yeah.
And it's going to be more focused, less on, well, my story's still there and kind of my experience coming back to faith.
Well, what turned you back to faith?
So I guess what what initially brought me back to faith is the contemplation of like suffering. And so one of the things early on, I was very anti-religious. I was very atheist or antichrist, depending on how you want to say it. Um, and so I had a lot of hatred for religion and the church upbringing that I was a part of. And that was kind of one of the things that also led to like the self-hatred, because I don't have like any faith or anything like that. I was just kind of going through the motions. And then when I was on deployment in Kuwait, I started learning a little bit more. And one of the things was that I learned that Christians believe that Jesus was God in human form. And when I learned about that, the concept kind of changed in my mind to where it's like, okay, so God came down in human form, suffered, and then died for all of us. And so I'm like, if God will suffer, why should we not? And that kind of gave me a relief to my story previously. And then I have a quote that I wrote in my book that I still like to this day, and it was the one that kind of that completed me coming back to faith, was that in truth you will find redemption. It's a quote that I wrote down, and it's very near and dear to me because I found a very similar quote in the Bible, which was John 3:21. It was, "For those who do what is true come to the light, so that it can be seen that their deeds came from God." And so I looked at my quote, I looked at that quote, and I'm like, okay, I'm back. And so within one line, I rekindled my faith with that.
That's fantastic.
And that was while you were writing a book or afterwards?
So this was directly after I wrote the book. So this was probably, so the manuscript was locked in. I just came back from deployment. We were talking about the book right before I got locked in. And then, so I guess during the 6-month publication process, that is when I refound my faith. So the book was finished but not published.
Mm-hmm.
So in process, or even slightly or shortly thereafter, the book has sort of been an impetus for you to get back into that. Mm-hmm. So maybe sort of reliving and rekindling, what had happened in your past sort of helped you, to where you are now.
Yeah, and I guess so. What the second one is going to be, it's going to be like a reevaluation, kind of the first book, and that's like, it was like, okay, this is what I got right, this is what I got wrong, this is what I was able to keep when it came to the faith. And then it explores a lot. And then it also, I realize now that I'm writing the second book of like why I ended up finding myself in a blackmail situation is because of my past. It kind of like directly led to it without me knowing. And then so that was one of the things that I liked about this new writing that I'm doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, it definitely sounds like you're in a better place than you were. I mean, you're obviously on the right path. I think probably this healing process is, in your opinion, is it ever done? Or are you going to have to continue to heal the rest of your life? Or, how does this close for you?
So right now I definitely don't have any reason to go away from the faith. I think I'm relatively very strong because I do find it to be the truth. And that's kind of what I was seeking when I was writing this book, was to continue to seek the truth and figure it out. And that's what eventually led me back to the faith. So like in my opinion, like if I turn away from the faith, I'm also turning away from the first book that I wrote, because that is what I was leading people in. And I kind of had the hidden message in there. I'm like, the person who said he hated religion now wrote faith 100 times in his own book. So I kind of already continued it. So like if I turn away from religion, then I'm also forsaking my first book and my first project. And I don't want to take that hope away from the reader as well. So that is one of the reasons that I keep going, even though coming back to faith was very difficult for me, because I had to rethink a lot about what I actually wrote. And I'm having to like change my entire life again around the religion, and I'm continuously to asking questions. And that's kind of what the YouTube channel is. Like right now, I started like at a Baptist church, then I went to Anglican church, and now I'm looking at like Orthodoxy and like Catholicism, because I'm trying to figure out what is the truth and where was the church and everything like that. And so that's kind of been a big thing I've been looking into right now, is like figuring out where to go next.
And so can you share what your YouTube channel is so people can kind of subscribe to that? And links on how to obtain your book and stuff?
Yeah. So the YouTube channel itself is the same as the title of the book. It is Answering the Hard Questions. And it does have a picture of the cover on the YouTube channel as well. it's pretty small right now. I think there's only like 10 people. I've been doing it for like a week or two now, so just starting up. I also have my book in there, and the link of their YouTube. I also have my social media if people want to follow me on social media or ask me like questions themselves. As far as the book, you can pretty much get it on any online store right now. So I've seen it on like Barnes and Noble. I've seen it like on Kindle. I've seen it like on ebook. I've seen it like in online stores, Goodreads. I've had a couple. It's received about like 4 different awards now. It's been put into 4 different competitions. So it's been doing pretty well on that front. And now it's just trying to get people more involved with it and going from there.
And so your social media, are you talking about Facebook, Instagram, and is it the same as Answer the Hard Questions? Is it the same username or what do they call those fucking things? Identities, handles,
profile name?
Yeah, profile name. Let's do that one.
So my Facebook is just my name, so it's just like Devin Fish. I'm pretty easy to find. There's not too many of us out there. And then I've kind of been like sharing my YouTube videos on there for people who want to attend. And then it is a public profile as well, so anyone can go down there. They can if they have any questions for me or something like that, they can. By all means, I don't mind answering questions, or talking through some of these situations that I had to go through myself. If someone else finds it themselves in the same circumstance. Facebook is probably the only one I have right now. I had an Instagram, I had a Threads. Those were the 2 that kind of got invaded by the bots. So I closed those ones down, and I don't think I'll go on there for like a little while just in case they remember my name. So right now it's just the Facebook and the YouTube.
All right. Got it.
And you got a award in 2021 too, correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that is one of kind of the turning points of the book. That's where I kind of officially say that's when my life started turning around, was around 2021 and then 2022. So that was a Retention NCO of the Year award to become a career counselor. So it was a competition. I still think about that award, but it was a division level board. So any NCO that was a retention NCO that wanted to go compete could compete. So out of 1,000 people, I was the only one to show up that year. And so I just had to go on that board and pass. I was sweating bullets, but I was pretty much competing with myself at that point, which they liked because they're like, hey, out of an entire post of soldiers, you were the only one that showed initiative and wanted to go there. Mm-hmm. And I ended up getting my career counselor packet submitted after that. But they also complimented me a couple times. They're like, hey, you got some of the questions the career counselors with the badges didn't get. So they're like, and you don't even know the job yet. So I was like, all right. And when that actually helped me turn my life around, because when I got out of the hospital initially, I asked myself another hard question, which was what would make me happy again. I looked at my 68 Charlie job that I originally wanted to do, which was to be a nurse, because I wanted to help people. Yeah. I wasn't getting that as a cavalry scout, plus with all the other things that were going on in my life at the time. And so I looked at career counselor. Pretty much what they do is that they do the contracts for the soldiers. They do their reenlistments. They do their bonuses. They help them PCS if they want a PCS. They also help them reclass and get into other jobs in the Army if they want to get into other jobs. And so they're helping soldiers every day throughout their entire Army career. And so I'm like, I could do that. And so I kind of use that as a goal to where anytime I got back to those, whether it was like suicidal ideations or if it was like the dating websites that I was going through or the self-hatred, I would kind of look at the goal of becoming a career counselor. And that kind of helped me keep my mind on something more positive rather than what was going on in my life at that time. And then from there, what also helped me about becoming a career counselor was that I had to change who I was as a person. Because at that time, I didn't really like people. I was new, and I didn't like the Army. I hated the Army before that, based on everything that was going on. And so I'm like, as a career counselor, you have to be the advocate, because I'm like, hey, sign this contract and stay in the military. So I'm the recruiter for the military that's working with the soldiers that already know what's going on. So I have to be an advocate. I actually have to like the Army. And then on top of that, I was pretty much mute. And so I had to go around and talk to random people every day. I'm like, hey, do you want to talk about your Army career? So that helped me change as a person just by making that goal itself.
Well, it sounds like that award, like you said, has been a turning point in your life. So, and thank you everything you're doing
Yeah,
to
congratulations.
to
Yeah.
congratulate and thank you for helping other soldiers who are also struggling. I know it's a big deal. Correct the number for me if I'm wrong. Is it 22 soldiers per day that take their life, or 24?
Broke up again.
Is it 22 or 24 soldiers per day that take their life? Is that the stat?
Ooh, that one I don't know. I do know the rates are pretty high up there. I know when it comes to the suicide rates, we lose more people to suicide than we do wars now. And that is a horrendous stat to actually consider. I don't know the number, but I do know that fact that we have lost more people to suicide than war.
And so thank you for helping reduce that number. Whatever you're doing, it's appreciated. And, I have a brother who served in the Marines for 8 years. So, I know I understand the struggle with what he's been through, just being by his side and helping with what I can. So we will include a link in the description for your book, your social media. Anything else you would like to add to close this, and what you would like us to add in the description as well?
Yeah, I guess it goes back to the quote that I referenced earlier, which is, "In truth, you will find redemption." So I would just ask people to continue to follow the truth, and not, based on what is going on in your life currently, but to kind of like look past what you're going through, regardless if it's suffering, and kind of ask yourself, how can I help someone else by going through this suffering? And that's kind of how I look at life right now. It's like anything that I go through is just another lesson that I can pass on to someone else and help them in their journey.
And certainly, when the next book's completed, if you're willing, you're welcome back to talk about that as well.
Oh, absolutely. I always love telling the story, and I love having new conversations. So there'll be plenty of conversations when the new one comes out.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Thank you, Devin.
Thank you for joining us.
You fought two battles. You fought your personal battle and battles in the military, and we really appreciate that.
It,
and it was very nice meeting you and having this discussion.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Devin. Bye-bye.